what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Today on, I guess I'll do it with Pat House, I have one of my idols, somebody I've known about my whole entire career. He has a brand new book called Still Standing, and Carson, Letterman, a million other stories, which we'll get to. So today I have Tom Dreesen. Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Pat.
Dude, this is awesome. Thank you for book. Your book is fantastic. I read it last week and finished up this morning. Very awesome read. I love, I'm a huge, I hate the term stand-up nerd, but I love stand-up comedy and the history of it. And I love the stories of, days before my time from the Comedy Store and stuff like that. So you were there for all of that. And I find that awesome.
Well, thank you. This is my 51st year in show business.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. I've outlived all my critics,
Yeah.
Like if I try out new material at the Laugh Factory or something like that, if I come off the road and I go to the comics your age, oftentimes introduce me and like to introduce you to a legend. And I say, you know how you become a legend in this business? When all your critics are dead. All those just like you passed away, now you become a legend. They can't criticize you anymore.
Now, you started in a comedy duo with Tim Reed, the first black and white comedy duo. So after you guys went your separate ways, how did you dive into stand-up on your own?
Well, let me tell that story first. In September 1969, Tim Reed and I became America's first black and white comedy team. History shows we were the last. We wrote a book about that years ago called Tim and Tom, an American Comedy in Black and White. And now there's a lot of interest talking about doing a 6 one-hour series of what it was like for us to tour the nation as the first black-white comedy team in the days when there were no comedy clubs. So we worked all black clubs in the North and the South, and what they affectionately call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. The 20 Grand in Detroit, the Sugar Shack in Boston, in Chicago, the Burning Spear, the High Chaparral. But in the Philadelphia area, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City, before they had gambling in Atlantic City, there was a place called the Club Harlem on Kentucky Avenue, which was the apex of the Chitlin Circuit. When you arrived at the Club Harlem, you made the big time. That's where a lot of all the big black acts performed at. And the interesting thing about it was in nightclubs in those days, whenever you worked, it was always a singer, a comic, or a comic singer, either way. But you usually opened on a Monday and you closed on a Saturday night. At the Club Harlem, you opened on Saturday night and you closed the following Friday. Your first show Saturday night, opening night, was 10 o'clock at night. Second show was 2 o'clock in the morning. Third show was 6 a.m., what they call the breakfast show.
Yeah, I read that in your book, and that blew my mind because I started in a black club, and Saturdays they had a midnight show, and people weren't even awake for that show. So when I read your book, I'm like, a 6 a.m. show? Who the hell is down for that?
Who came? All the waiters and the waitresses, the night people, but all the pimps and the hoes from Philadelphia, from Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, from Newark, they came down in droves, and they'd bring the ladies in and snort coke off the table, and it was a rowdy, but it was a fantastic place to work, and it had 5 acts on the bill, and oh God, it was exciting, But anyhow, and then when the team split up, in answer to your question, after 6 years, the team split up. Tim and I are still the best of friends, but he wanted to be more of an actor, and I started out on my own. And I ended up on the West Coast. I was living in Chicago at the time, but in those days, wherever you went in 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah, have you ever been on Johnny Carson?" And if you hadn't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. You might want to be one, you might going to be one, but you aren't one now. So when Johnny Carson moved out of New York City into the West Coast, out to Burbank, in 1972, he came out there. By the time 1975, when I got out there, he really was established out there, and it was the show to do. Freddie Prinze did one appearance on The Tonight Show. He got a sitcom the next day.
Wow.
I did one appearance on The Tonight Show, and CBS signed me to a development deal the following day. I was in the unemployment line one day with a wife and 3 kids, broke on my rear end. And one appearance on that show changed my life. But we had to get to the West Coast. So all across the land, all these comedians migrated out here to California because the Comedy Store was the hottest comedy spot in the country. And there were no other comedy clubs out there then. Later, the Improv came and the Laugh Factory. But at that time, it was on Sunset Boulevard, and it was the hottest. Comedy was the rock and roll of the 70s. So it was a hot spot. Every night, comedians would come off stage and they just got discovered, by one of the shows. The shows that you did that came to send talent coordinators, Johnny Carson, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Dinah Shore, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. Canada had three talk shows that they sent their talent coordinators down. So there was a buzz every night at that Comedy Store.
Oh.
I was going on every night with all these unknown comedians, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Robin Williams, Michael Keaton, Gallagher. The girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger.
I love stories like that. Now, you were the liaison between the comics and Mitch C. Shore during the strike, correct?
Yeah. What happened, Pat? I was by that time I was doing the Tonight shows, all the TV shows that I just mentioned. I also was touring with Sammy Davis Jr. in Las Vegas and all over the country. I'd come off the road, and as soon as I came off the road, I would go to the Comedy Show with my tape recorder to try out new material, because the Tonight Show, Johnny Carson demanded that new original monologues, not two guys going to bar jokes.
Yes, absolutely.
Original monologues. And I ended up doing 61 appearances on the Tonight Show, but you had to keep coming up with the new material, new 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So I would immediately take my tape recorder over to the Comedy Store and try out new material. But at that time, we all went to what they called the original room, seated like 110 people whenever we're trying out new material. Mitzi had bought the second half of that building, Mitzi Shore, who was the owner of the Comedy Store. And she turned that into what they called the main room, a 400 and something seater. And stars like Rodney Dangerfield or Jackie Mason in those days would come there and perform and take the door. They got the door and she got the liquor. So they made if they charged $20 at the door, $40 at the door, whatever they charged, they got that for every person that came in. One week when I came off the road, I'm on at the Comedy Store. I go to the original room. They said, "Oh no, Tom, you're in the main room." I said, "The main room?" Oh. So I go in there, and like I said, I'm performing with Elaine Boozler, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Michael Keaton, all of us, Robin Williams, So there's 5 or 6 of us, and the place is packed. I felt like I was back in Vegas. Afterward, I go to Cantor's where all the guys hang out at, and all the guys and girls, and Jay started complaining, "Hey man, she pays them, they get the door. We filled that room. Maybe it took 5 of us to fill the room, but we still filled the room." And all talk was about getting paid. So the comedians wanted to have a meeting. I went to the meeting. I was doing fine. I didn't need whatever money the Comedy Store could pay. But I went to the meeting because they're my friends. And it was chaotic. Everybody talking at the same time. If you've ever been in a room with 112 comedians, you know that they're all going to,
nothing's going to get accomplished.
And so after the first meeting, they only decided to have a second meeting. I go to the second meeting, and it was still chaos. Now, I had been in the JCs back in Illinois, and I knew how to conduct a meeting. I knew Robert's Rules of Order and all those kind of things. So I finally took over. I said, "You guys, let me chair the meeting." And I got them all organized. Now, when you got those kids in those days organized, they were a force to be reckoned with. These were bright young minds, and got them organized. And they decided, Mitzi did not want to pay them. They decided they wanted to go on strike, and we went on strike for 8 weeks. And it was a real tragic part of my life, a tough time in my life. But finally, after 8 weeks, we won through a series of mishaps and hardships. And 3 weeks later, one of our guys committed suicide because he couldn't get back on at the Comedy Store. And it was just I never went back there for over 40 years, but I went back there for the documentary recently.
Mm-hmm. So you mainly did the Improv then when you were in town?
Yeah, we do the Improv or the Laugh Factory. The Laugh Factory is a great room to work, a terrific comedy room.
Laugh Factory is, it's a great club. I'm in Philadelphia, and I'm very tight with Dom Herrera. Are you friends with him?
He is one of my dear friends in the whole world. He's my paisano, and I love him to death. And I've done, by the way, he had like a podcast thing. I did 3 of them, I think, 1 hour 20 minutes times, you know.
Yeah, they're fun. I've actually seen a lot of those. Dom has been very, very good to me. He's a family friend. He went to grade school with my mom's oldest brother. But then when I started doing stand up, like he was very good to me. He brought me around a handful of weekends to a bunch of clubs, and he really helped me out in my early days. So I'm very grateful for him for that. He really, really gave me some good weekend shows. He had me host for him, then I would middle for him. So he was one of the good guys in my back pocket.
Yeah, he's too, and a wonderful comedian. Good friend.
It's so funny. So funny. And the crowds here love him. Like he just murders when he's here in Philly or New Jersey.
Yeah. And he should. He murders out in Hollywood when I'm with him, you know.
Yeah.
We work out the Laugh Factory. Sometimes I'll be before him, sometimes after him, you know, trying out new material. By the way, I just want to say something too. When I started out in show business, if you'd have ever said to 5 comedians, we're going to put you all on one show and you're going to all follow one another, they'd have said, hell no, I'm not going to do that. I can follow 5 comedians. But today that's standard. You know, it's just something that we all nonchalantly do. But years ago, they would have balked at that, you know.
Now, was that your average lineup at the time? Like you mentioned, like Letterman, Leno, Robin Williams, Elaine Boozler, yourself. Was that typical lineup every night?
Sure. Michael Keaton. I'm leaving out a lot of other.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, there's a million names you could rattle off, I'm sure. But that's just insane to me. That's so awesome. But that's just crazy to have everybody who's like a huge comedy legend just back to back to back to back. I would have really wish. It all comes down to jealousy. I just wish I was around to see that back in the day.
I tell you, you better have your game on because they had their. And see, the hard part, and that is, I go there to break in new material. I'm following people that did solid sets, you know, and your ego says, oh my God, I've got to. I don't want to. I want to kill like the act in front of me killed. But you got to discipline yourself to put that new material in there. And I always tell everybody, you know, if you got a new 6 minutes, don't open with it. Put it in the middle. You know,
exactly.
And you know, in fact, you know, you never break in new material at the comedy show. I'm being facetious, but a lot of the guys said it's easier to break in new material at Caesar's Palace because there you can't get hurt. At the comedy show, in that audience every night were coordinators from all the shows, and they were all looking at you. You know, not only for stand-up comedy, but people that were looking for actors for sitcoms and stuff. It was an era that's hard to describe. You know, that the excitement and the energy on Sunset Boulevard every night at the Comedy Store.
Do you still record your sets now?
Yeah, I work. I can do it with my cell phone now.
Mm-hmm. I love that because I record every single set. I don't always go back and listen, but it's so helpful if you just said something differently or if you said something off the cuff, you have it. It's so monumental.
Well, also placement. You know, oftentimes you got a piece of material that's not working in this part of your act, but it works better at another part of your act, and that all of that is part of hearing yourself back. You know. One thing about we're lifelong learners as human beings, let alone as stand-up comedians, but you never really arrive, in my opinion, in stand-up comedy. It's always another level that you can learn at, you know. And this is my 51st year in show business, and I'm still, you know, enthralled at the idea of going on stage and trying out new material to a group of strangers, you know, and then when it works. You know, we're like artists. We're like we're like, you know, selling our paintings. You know, most artists they're dead when their paintings start selling. You know, we do it night after night live. You know, our paintings. If I get a funny thought during the day and I write it down that night, I can go into a comedy club and get up on stage and see if it works. You know, it's fascinating.
It's the best thing in the whole entire world. And that makes me so happy to hear you say that because even 51 years in for you still get excited over new material. A fresh idea is still so exciting to me. I've been doing comedy 16 years and a brand new idea, it just makes your day better.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, it's again, it's the creative mind, and comedians have creative minds, and you know, and we are artists. And we're rare artists because, you know, well, I'll explain that in a little while. But when most artists, like I say, when they put their stuff on a canvas, they never know if it's going to sell. We know that night, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I say we're rare because stand-up comedy is the greatest profession on the planet, in my opinion, and for many reasons. But if you know anything about comedy, you know that it's healing. Laughter is healing. Now, years ago, that was a theory. It was a theory that that laughter is psychologically a deterrent because the brain can't think of two thoughts at the same time. So if you have problems on your mind, but you're watching a comedian, you're forgetting your problems. So it's a psychological deterrent. But now, since a guy named Norman Cousins, who was the editor of Saturday Review, he was dying of a terminal illness. He was in the hospital, and the doctor told him he was going to die. Years of stress, negative input gave him this heart condition, and he didn't have long to live. He laid in the hospital, and he thought, if negative input, stress made me ill, then maybe positive input would make me well. So he checked out of the hospital, and he'd only watch I Love Lucy reruns, Candid Camera, Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers. He only would listen to comedy albums. He didn't watch the evening news. He didn't read newspapers. He just watched funny things. He lived 27 years after the doctors told him he was going to die. Because of him, UCLA did research on what happens to the human body when it laughs. And after you have a hearty laugh, and you laugh so hard and tears run down your face, and you go, oh, and a sense of well-being comes over you because during the laughter, your brain released endorphins into the bloodstream, which are chemicals. So laughter is not only a psychological deterrent, it's physiologically therapeutic. So comedians are physicians of the soul. They're healers. They really are.
It's great for the audience, but I think it's great for us as stand-ups as well. If we're having a shit day or a shit week, it's an escape for us. That's the highlight of our night, is going on stage for a half hour, an hour, and we forget our problems as well.
Yeah, of course. And the other thing too is that, they did a survey around the world, many years ago about the 10 fears of man. The insurance companies of America, they did this big survey. Death was fourth. Pain was second. Getting up in front of an audience was the number one fear of mankind. If you can get up in front of an audience and talk about being a house painter for an hour, or a lawyer, or about your profession or whatever, if you're a farmer, if you can get up and talk in front of an audience for 1 hour, you're in less than 1% of the population of the world. But if you can get up and make people laugh for an hour, you're in less than 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the population of the world. That's how special stand-up comedians are. And I say that not because I'm in it. I give a motivation talk to stand-up comedians. I give motivation talks all over the country to corporate America, to universities and stuff. But I have a specific one for comedians called The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy and How to Get There. And I tell stand-up comedians how important they are, what I just explained to you. Do not tarnish this wonderful gift you have by drugs and alcohol and destroying the brain, the thing that makes you this wonderful stand-up comedian, this gift you have. Do not destroy it by talking badly about other comedians. You never hear a doctor. Have you ever gone to a doctor and said to Dr. Milhouse, gee, I would like to go to Dr. Derringer? You never heard a doctor say, Derringer, I wouldn't take my snake to that doctor. They never talk badly about their profession because they have such respect for their profession. And we're just as professional as doctors in so many ways. And we work at it, we're constant learners of it. So never degrade this wonderful profession you're in by talking badly of other comedians.
No. So you spent many, many years opening for Frank Sinatra. And I wanted to ask you about that because I've opened for a lot of big names over the years. Like, Sebastian Maniscalco took me around for a long time. So I was, I worked with a handful of headliners. So we're doing like big shows in front of thousands of people, big theaters and all. And when they're there to see somebody else, it can be rough for the opener. It can be amazing, but there are also some rough nights out there. Any nights in particular where you're opening for Frank and just the crowd's not on your side? Never.
I have to say that I was very fortunate for two things. Number one, Frank Sinatra's crowd was a mature crowd. B, when I first started touring with Frank Sinatra, I'd already done about 40 Tonight shows. I toured with Sammy Davis. I toured with Smokey Robinson. I toured with Natalie Cole, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Dawn.
Oh, my God.
I had worked for all these artists. And now when I went with Sinatra, by that time I had already had, my profession down. But the other thing is, I had opened for maybe 2,500 people, 3,500 people with Sammy and with Smokey and stuff, but never 20,000 people. And in Hawaii, I opened for him in front of 40,000 people. So it was a totally different dynamic. Fortunately, when I started touring with Frank Sinatra, I had already worked with many other artists. I was touring with Sammy Davis Jr. for years. I toured with Smokey Robinson, with Natalie Cole, Gladys Knight and the Pips. I toured with Tony Orlando and Dawn, Mac Davis, so many other artists. So I had a lot of experience, and I'd done, like I say, over 40 Tonight shows at that time. And so when I went out in front of his audience, I'd already had some recognition, but also his audience was very mature, So I had to learn some tricks, though. And the tricks were, on how do you get 20,000 people to come to your attention now? You had to get them. Now, when you walk out in front of 20,000 people at the Nassau Coliseum or wherever you were, that, you were in the round. So they were all around you.
So you were doing the round. Okay.
Because it wasn't a proscenium situation where people were in front of you. They were all around you. Now, if there's 20,000 people in an arena, about 2,000 or 3,000 are trying to find their seats. So for you to go out there and do your A material, it is stupid. It's dumb. You got to go out there and get them focused on you now. So what I would do, I'd walk out there. First of all, I'd do the first joke on me. The lights would go down low in the Coliseum, and then the orchestra would strike up. Bam, 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 bam. They're down in the orchestra pit. People thought Frank was coming out, so then people would cheer, oh, and then they'd introduce me. So you're on your way to the stage, and you're, I thought Frank was coming out. I'd get up on stage and I'd say, how many of you out there? I want you to applaud. How many of you out there thought Frank Sinatra was coming out? Applaud. I didn't say raise your hand. Excuse me. I said applaud.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd applaud. I'd say, I know just how you feel. I'm a little bit disappointed myself. Now, that joke was on me. Okay. Then I'd say, how many of you out there are in this magnificent arena for your very first time? Applaud. And they'd applaud. I'd say, how many of you out there are seeing Frank Sinatra live your very first time? Applaud. And they'd applaud. I'd say, how many of you out there aren't wearing any underwear? Applaud. They'd applaud and laugh and applaud. Now, my point of that is, I talk, you react. I talk, you react. I didn't say raise your hand. I said applaud.
Mm-hmm.
I talk, you react. I'm doing that to the left of me, to the right of me, behind me. I'm bringing the focus to me, center stage. After I did that, now I would do a couple jokes about their local area that I was in. I write a couple of jokes about something that happened to their local mayor or something that was happening in their community that whole room would know about, or the majority would know about. Those two jokes I would do up front. And then I would go into my A material, but the key was to bring that focus to you and to get them going. And so I always had huge success with his audiences, or Frank wouldn't have kept me. He wanted a comedian that could come up with new material all the time because we went to the same cities all the time. And in Hawaii, like I said, there was 40,000 people in Hawaii, outdoors with big screens and everything. And you just had to adapt to that environment,
Messes with your timing with when crowds are that size, because it's such a different kind of laughter. You can hear it in waves from the back to the front. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's the if I were to do 30 minutes tonight at the Laugh Factory in front of 180 or 200 people, 30 minutes. And then I did that same 30 minutes the following day in front of Frank Sinatra's 20,000 people. It's hard to explain, but it's a totally different dynamic. You have to, your timing, you set your timing off of their laughter, and so it's a totally different dynamic. And it's hard to, when you dissect comedy, it gets boring. But one of the things that I try when I talk I can teach young comedians a lot of things, stage presence and mic technique and joke structure and stuff like that. I can't teach you timing. You either have it or you don't. And timing, by my best description, is pretend there's a pond of water in front of you and you have a rock and you throw the rock as high in the air as you can. And it comes down slowly and then it hits the pond and then ripples across the water, the ripples across the pond. Now, if that rock is laughter, when it's on its way up, you do not move on your next line or you step on your own laughter. Some nights I move when it just starts to come down. Some nights I let it come halfway down. Some nights I let it hit the pond. And some nights I let it hit the pond and ripple all the way across the pond. And I can't tell you before I go up there what I'm going to do because I haven't heard the audience's reaction yet. But my brain knows, when to move on that next line. Some nights, when it's going real good and that laughter's erupting across, I let it go all the way across the pond and I sense that it's going to go some more. And I'll take a couple more and then I move, and that's what timing. And then what happens is you get the audience caught up in your rhythm.
Yes. Oh yeah. I'm a big fan of making the crowd come to me. You make them want it. You mold the show and you tell them what to do.
Yes.
Did you have a specific act you did with Frank? Like, was your act opening for him the same thing you would do in a comedy club, or did you have something specific for his crowds?
Well, I had a wealth of material to draw from, so, but I was always constantly changing material too. I had certain openings that would work in some places that wouldn't work in others, and closings like in Vegas, Tahoe, Reno, Atlantic City, in the casinos. I might close different than I would open. Than I would in a big arena. Mm-hmm. So I'm constantly changing my material. And by the way, Frank stood in the wings every night before I went on, and he would listen to my new material and would oftentimes comment on it because he liked the fact that I was changing material all the time.
That's awesome. Now, do you still write every day, or what's your writing process like now?
Well, I never was one of those kind of guys that sat down from 11 o'clock at night to 12 o'clock at night and wrote. My mind is constantly in maneuvering. I might be on a golf course, and something funny come to me and I'll write it down immediately or speak into my cell phone.
Yes, I do it every day, almost daily. I have to, because it's out the window and you tell yourself, okay, I'm speaking of me. I tell myself I'll remember it, but I don't. It's so easy to forget a good idea. Even if you think it's great, you're like, oh, I'll remember that. And then 2 hours later, it is gone.
No doubt. Steve Allen, who wrote like 5,000 songs, wrote maybe 150 books. His brain never rested. He'd go to bed at night with a small tape recorder in bed. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and something would come to him and he'd just talk into the tape recorder and go back to sleep. Then he'd wake up, he'd talk in the tape recorder. He had 2 secretaries that would type up his gibberish the next day. To them, it was gibberish, but to him, he remembered what it was about, and that's what you have to do. Instantly write it down, no matter, even if you're sitting there having dinner with someone and they say something that sparks something in your mind, say, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm going to write that down or speak into your cell phone because, that's how the creative mind works,
Oh, absolutely. And then with minds like ours, I feel like it's impossible to shut the machine down. Like, because anything can happen to us or around us that we notice and it triggers a thought, which something is interesting to us and we have to address it somehow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Comedy is, like I say, a lifelong journey. I'll tell you a great story. Years ago, I used to do the Dean Martin roast. And George, I did a Dean Martin roast with George Burns, and I really enjoyed George Burns. He was a terrific guy. And one night I was working at Lake Tahoe at Harrah's, and he was next door at Caesars in Lake Tahoe. And I rushed over to see his show. He was 95 years old. He didn't run out to the microphone, but when he got out there, he did a strong hour and 10 minutes. And
wow!
I went backstage afterward, and he was in the dressing room. He had some 3x5 cards. I walked in the dressing room. He was looking at these 3x5 cards. And I said, George, great show. He said, oh, thank you, Tommy. He said, I was working on some new material tonight. And I said to myself, that's what I want to be. I want to be 95 years old working on new material.
That's the shit I love hearing. That's exactly what I love hearing. Like, knowing that you still get excited for a new idea and new material makes me happy because that's exactly how I feel. And I don't think that's going to change.
No, of course. And it shouldn't,
because it's exciting.
Yeah. George Burns was interesting. At age 95, Caesar's Palace wanted to sign him to a 5-year contract. And he turned it down. He said, because he wasn't sure Caesars would be around in 5 years.
Oh, that's very funny. That sounds like a George Burns joke too.
Yeah.
Now, did you know Rodney well?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was one of my favorites since I was a very small kid.
Rodney did jokes. I love that once in a while I hear one of these young guys or girls act like they aren't comedian. See, I don't do jokes, man. I do observations. You do. If you're a comedian, you do jokes. They're jokes. I don't care what you want to call them. They're jokes. And they have a setup line and a punchline. And comedy is two things when you're writing a joke. Number one, it's 9/10 surprise. The audience laughs because they didn't think you were going to say that or do that. So the setup line has to hide the punchline. And the other rule is there are no victimless jokes. Who's the victim in the joke? And Rodney, of course, was the victim in all of his jokes.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had an arsenal full of those jokes, quick jokes that were A, very good, B, worded just perfectly to the syllable, and he just had millions of them.
Well, you understand, he knew how to edit too, and that's very important. Taking the fat out of the joke, getting to the punchline, taking the fat. Now, the only problem with Rodney's act was Rodney killed on the Tonight Show. 5 minutes about getting over respect was hysterical, 5 or 6 minutes. But when you're in Las Vegas and you're headlining, you're doing an hour. After a 1 hour of I get no respect, after 20 minutes, we got the joke. Now we can start seeing it coming. You know what I mean? So Rodney would have shills in the audience sometimes, maitre d's, or people would say, Rodney, when's your next movie? And then he'd go off on that a little bit. Rodney, is it true that you and your first wife don't get along or something? He had shills sometimes help change the pace of, because again, 1 hour on one hook is a little bit too much.
But he was a master at it.
Oh yeah, he was a good guy, Rodney was a good guy.
I've heard that from a lot of people. I know Rodney was very nice to Dom Herrera, so I can sit and listen to Dom talk about Rodney all day because I think it's so cool that he was, that close to the action. So what comedians make you laugh? Do you watch a lot of comedy now on Netflix or anything, or?
Yeah, this new kid, Pat House, he knocks me out.
That is the best answer anybody has said on the podcast so far.
Well, I loved comedians before I was one. I loved comedians. I never thought I'd ever be a comedian. It was the furthest thing from my mind. But I loved comedians before I was one. And that's why I tell people, there are a lot of comedians that I wouldn't hang out with, that we nice people, or nor would they hang with me probably. But I've never seen a comedian on stage that I didn't like. I don't want to sound like Will Rogers. He never met a man he didn't like.
Yes.
I always find something about even an open mic night. If I'm watching some young kids, if you've got courage enough to get up on that stage and try to make people laugh, you already won my heart, there's a young kid named Johnny Sanchez that I love. A Mexican comedian. When he goes on, I run in to watch him. I just like his stage presence and some of the funny stuff he has to do. But the Laugh Factory, when I go over there on weekends, they have wonderful stand-ups. Today you don't get on at the Comedy Store or at the Laugh Factory, these clubs, unless you're really good.
Oh yeah, very high expectations, very high caliber of entertainment.
I like Chappelle for the reason that today, the politically correct police are trying to shut comedy down as much as they can. They're going to tell you what you can say. The First Amendment in our country, men died at Normandy, Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, and all these places so that we could have freedom, liberty to say what we want to say. The First Amendment, we can say whatever we want to say. You don't have to listen to us. You can walk out on us. You can turn us off. But you can't stop us from saying what we want to say. Now, there are people out there, the politically correct police, that want you. They're always, and we don't even know who they are. It's not like they have an office or an organization. Oh, you can't say that and you can't say this. You can say whatever the hell you want to say. Just don't listen to us. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Everybody knows that. But Dave, whenever somebody says to me something about, oh, you can't say that, I say, I would like you to go to tell Dave Chappelle what he can say and what he can't say. I want to be there when you tell him that he can say, so he can tell you where you can stick your politically correctness,
He's a true master too, because it's like he's creating a symphony. Like he could read the back of a shampoo bottle and I would pay attention. He's enthralling immediately.
Yeah. A while back I was doing talk show interview, and they asked me about a Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin story, and I was telling them one time something they said, and Frank said, "Hey, Deg," and Dean said, "Yeah," and the guy said, "What?" I said, "Well, Frank and Dean called each other Deg. It was it was short of Dago, but that's what they called each other, Deg." And the guy said, "Boy, they couldn't get away with that today." I said, "I would love to be in the room. I would hope it would be on the 17th floor or on the roof of the Empire State Building, and you tell Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin what they could say and what they couldn't say, because open the window, you're going out the window, you know."
Now, do you perform in Chicago often still? Do you return home?
Yeah, I like to go back to my hometown a lot. You know, I do a lot of shows back there, and it's just so much fun for me to go back. I grew up, I had 8 brothers and sisters, Pat. We lived in a shack on the south side of Chicago, a suburb called Harvey. I don't know. You read the book, so you know.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, a raggedy poor kid and holes in my shoes. And you know, if we lived in a shack. If a window broke, you stuck a rag in it, you know. I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret. So for me to go back to my hometown, they named a street after me, you know, where I used to sell newspapers. I sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" at Wrigley Field.
Oh, that's awesome.
7th inning, you know, I throw out the first pitch. All of this for a kid that grew up poor like me is just so exciting to go back home, you know, and to perform for a hometown audience is always exciting. You know?
Great crowds there. I love Zanies. It's one of my favorite clubs in the country.
Yeah, it's a real good, and it's been there for years and years.
That's what I love about it too. I can spend hours just looking at the walls, all the old headshots and everything of people who, some are alive, some are dead, some don't do comedy anymore. Like, I love that you can see the history as soon as you walk in that club, and the crowds are great. All the Chicago shows I've done have been fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great city for comedy, and it's fun for me to go back. I don't do the comedy clubs back there, but I go back and do. I have a one-man show called. Sometimes I call it the Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh, and the other I call it an Evening of Laughter and Memories of Sinatra. So it's a stand-up comedy for 30 minutes, and then I go over to a bar on the stage and I tell a funny story at the bar, and all the lights go out. And when they hit the punchline, all the lights go out, and Frank comes on the screen singing. It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me, you know. And it's a saloon song that he loved to sing. And when he gets to the chorus, "Make it one for my baby and one more for the road," he goes off camera, off the screen, and the spotlight hits me. And now I'm in a bar and I've come home. And I tell the audience, the first time I heard that voice, I was 8 years old, shining shoes in a bar, and he was on the jukebox. And I take that audience from that little boy on the south side of Chicago, hearing Sinatra on the jukebox, to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So I take him on that journey, and while I'm telling stories, pictures are coming on the screen, authenticating the stories. And I had the people laughing, and then I have them in tears. Funeral, and then I turn right around and I have them laughing again. I close with a funny monologue, and then I toast them all with Jack Daniels, because that was Frank's drink of choice. And I say, "I wish for all of you what Frank Sinatra wished for you. The very last song that he ever sang is that the best is yet to come. Good night, everybody." And then Frank is singing, "The best is yet to come," as I'm taking my bows. You know, but I wanted to do that kind of show. I do it in theaters all around the country, but I wanted to do it because I always thought that a good comedian could make you laugh, you know, for an hour and a half, but a great comedian can make you laugh and cry. And that time. And I've only seen 2 comedians do that, was Red Skelton and Richard Pryor. And I just found that fascinating, that you would get an audience to the peak of your laughter, and just get them, you know, right on top. And then you would ditch that and take them down to a dark place, but turn right around and bring them back up again.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a challenge that I wanted to try before I, you know, went to that comedy club in the sky, you know. And I've been doing it around the country for several years, and I really enjoy it. It gets great reviews.
Have you brought it to Philadelphia?
No, and it would be great there, you know, because there's a large Italian community all
Absolutely.
around. And yeah, it would be great. I'll let Pat, that's your job. You know, as soon as this COVID's over with, you're gonna get me booked into a theater there, and
I can
commission you.
I can absolutely make that happen. Well, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining me. I know, are you golfing today?
Yes, I am, as a matter
Beautiful.
of fact. But it's great weather out here. Yeah, but I would like if everybody would take a look at my book. It's, as you know, Still Standing, My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. And you can get it on Amazon.com, and it'll be at your house in 2 days.
Absolutely. Fantastic read. I flew through it and I loved it. So thank you for coming here and sharing some stories. I love hearing stories like that, and even better to hear them right from you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Pat. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Thank you, Tom Dreesen.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.